This is how the edge looks like for the rib 2x2. The edge stitches look rolled over without the visible bind-off row. I leave a yarn tail of approximately 4 length of the row plus about 4 inches extra or 10 centimeters extra. Then I move the beginning of my bind-off row to a knit stitch. I'm going to do the binding off in 4 steps. Step 1, I will bind 2 knit stitches that are positioned together. Step 2, 2 purl stitches that surround the 2 knit stitches. Step 3, 2 knit stitches that surround 2 purl stitches. And step 4, the 2 purl stitches in between. And then I repeat. Step 1, 2 knit stitches together. Step 2, 2 purl stitches around them. Step 3, 2 knit stitches that surround 2 purl stitches. And 2 purl stitches in between. Again, 2 knit stitches together, step 1. Step 2, 2 purl stitches around them. Step 3, 2 knit stitches that surround 2 purl stitches. And 2 purl stitches in between. Each stitch is worked twice, first time contrary to its name, knit stitch purlwise and purl stitch knitwise, and second time corresponding to its name, knit stitch knitwise and purl stitch purlwise. And this is just a reminder, knitwise from left to right as if going to knit, and purlwise from right to left as if going to purl. I will begin with a preparatory step. I will bind together the first stitch on the left needle with the last stitch on the right needle. And then I will follow with steps 1, 2, 3, 4, binding together alternating pairs of same stitches. 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, and so on. This is the preparatory step. I'm going to bind together the first stitch on the left needle tip with the last stitch on the right needle tip. The first knit stitch, I will insert the needle purlwise because it's the first time I'm working this stitch. And the last stitch on the right needle tip, it is a purl stitch. I will insert my needle knitwise because it's also the first time I'm working this stitch. And now I will slip both stitches off and lightly pull the yarn tail. It's handy to keep the yarn tail in front of work for the knit stitches and behind the work for the purl stitches. Next, I will do step 1, first knit stitch knitwise and second knit stitch purlwise. Step 2, I'm going to bind together 2 purl stitches that surround the first 2 knit stitches. And this is the first purl stitch, and this is how it looks. And I'm going into the stitch purlwise, or from back to front, and into the following purl stitch knitwise. And pull my yarn tail through. And just very lightly tighten. I move the yarn tail in front of work because I'm going to bind together 2 knit stitches. That's the first column and that's the second. And I go into the first knit stitch knitwise because it's the second time, and into the next knit stitch purlwise because it is the first time. And pull my yarn through. And I keep my purl stitch and knit stitch on the left needle tip yet. Now I'm going to do step 4, 2 purl stitches that are positioned together. These are the columns. And I go into the purl stitch purlwise or back to front. And the second purl stitch knitwise because it is the first time I'm working it. And I slip off both purl and knit stitches. Now I will repeat steps 1 through 4. Bring my yarn tail in front of work for the knit stitches, and I'm going to bind 2 knit stitches positioned together. First knit stitch knitwise because it's the second time, and the second knit stitch purlwise because it's the first time. Step 2, 2 purl stitches that surround the 2 knit stitches. First purl stitch purlwise because it's the second time, and the second purl stitch knitwise because it's the first time. Step 3, 2 knit stitches that surround 2 purl stitches. First stitch knitwise because it's the second time, and the next stitch purlwise because it's the first time. And I pull my yarn through, and do not slip off the stitches yet until you bind off the 2 purl stitches in between, step 4. So step 4, I'm binding together 2 purl stitches, and the first one, it's a little stuck, so I pull it out a little bit. I go in purlwise because I already worked this stitch once, and knitwise into the second purl stitch because it's the first time. And I pull my yarn through, and now I can slip off both purl stitches and the knit stitch and lightly tighten my yarn. Now I'm going to repeat again steps 1, 2, 3, 4. Step 1, 2 knit stitches together, knitwise into the first one and purlwise into the second one. Step 2, 2 purl stitches around them. I bring my yarn tail behind the work for convenience. And this purl stitch is already worked, so I'm going second time, which is purlwise, and the following purl stitch knitwise because it's the first time. Now I bring my yarn tail to the front to do the knit stitches that surround the purl stitches, and the first knit stitch, it's the second time, so I go knitwise, and the following knit stitch, it's the first time, so it's purlwise. Do not slip off the stitches yet. I will do now step 4, 2 purl stitches. These are the columns. The first purl stitch, it's the second time for the stitch. I go in purlwise. And the following purl stitch, it's the first time, so it is knitwise. And I can slip off both purl stitches and a knit stitch. I again repeat step 1. I go knitwise into the first stitch and purlwise into the second one. Now step 2, 2 purl stitches, purlwise or back to front into the first purl stitch, and knitwise left to right into the second purl stitch. Now step 3, 2 knit stitches that surround the 2 purl stitches. Knitwise into the first stitch because I already worked this stitch, and purlwise into the next knit stitch because it is the first time for this stitch. And I keep my stitches yet on my left needle. And now we'll do step 4, the 2 purl stitches. Purlwise into the first purl stitch because it is the second time for this stitch, and knitwise into the next purl stitch because it's the first time for that stitch. And now I slip off the purl stitches and the knit stitch and pull my yarn through. And just lightly tighten. And this is how the edge looks right now. The stitches appear to roll over. And these are the last steps 1 through 4. Knitwise into the first knit stitch and purlwise into the next one. Purlwise into the first purl stitch and knitwise into the next, and again 2 knit stitches, knitwise into the first one and purlwise into the next one. And these are the last 2 knit stitches. And now the last 2 purl stitches. Purlwise into the first one and knitwise into the last one. And pull my yarn through. And I finished. So this is how it looks. I will bring the yarn tail inside so you can see the end result better. And you can see the jogless edge with rolled over bind off stitches.